Hello and welcome to this episode of Ask a Neurologist. This is Rabea Akram. I'm a medical doctor, aspiring neurologist, and your host of the Ask a Neurologist podcast. This episode is sponsored and brought to you by Brainvincible. Brainvincible is a company I co-founded in 2018. It's dedicated to promote brain health through brain training programs, brain supplements, and many other products and services. To find out more about Brainvincible, you can check out our website. You will find the links in the description box below. So today's guest is a very dear friend and a very, very high achieving person that I happen to know. His name is James Mister. He is an Ivy League graduate, a top performer in his field, currently working for the German government in the US. He lives in California, Palo Alto, and has traveled a very long way and is also kind of jet lagged. So welcome, James. I'm delighted to have you here today.
Thank you, Dr. Rabea. I call her Dr. Bea or Dr. Rabea usually.
So James, tell us about what you're currently doing.
The current part of my work is really actually working for the Bavarian government, so the German state of Bavaria, Germany's largest state. And what I do is foreign direct investment and foreign trade promotion consulting, more or less. I help a lot of high-tech companies in the US on their journey into expanding into the European market. Germany being the largest market in Europe, it's a very attractive market. And there's a lot of questions, what to do, why to for, that need to be answered on their operational side, on their legal side, on the financial side, and in the tech area, a lot of product side, because there are a lot of, data usage questions. So all those sorts of fronts I deal with as the sort of middleman to service providers who are specialists. But a large chunk of the work we do, we answer a lot of the first questions that they need answered and help them free of charge because we're paid for by the government of Bavaria. So through the Ministry of Economic Affairs, Regional Development and Energy. And so I lead the office in San Francisco covering the western half of the US.
So from what I understand, you help US companies to come to Europe, especially Germany and Bavaria. That's your specialty. Yeah. You help them to make the transition to enter the German market.
Exactly.
And okay.
And the opposite. So also helping German Bavarian companies also that are going to the US. Because a lot of things from, like I said, the operational questions, legal questions, the type of business and entity setup, to small things like employment law, labor law, equity share, profit sharing, equity sharing, and then also you have questions about, in some cases, companies that want to form joint ventures, some companies that want to actually set up a manufacturing plant or set up some sort of large facility. Like all those sorts of projects usually go through governments in some way, shape, or form, and also explaining the landscape for R&D. Because there are a lot of subsidies for that kind of stuff if companies are doing a lot of their own in-house. Those are some of the questions, and in both directions, but majority helping US companies come to Germany, and not so much, but also to a lesser extent helping German Bavarian companies go to US. And like I said, this is just for the German state of Bavaria, which happens to be the largest and one of Germany's wealthiest states.
Okay, so would you say it's easy for US companies, also startups from the US to come to Europe, especially to Germany, and to start a business here?
In terms of starting a business, I do also see that. That's where a lot of entrepreneurs who might just be interested in coming to Europe or out of personal reasons, domestic reasons, might want to move to Europe. In the case of Americans, it's usually a partner or family, they're moving to US. But what we mostly, and I mostly work with, because I lead the office now and have a team of 3 people, help companies that already have an existence in US and they want to expand. That means they want to grow, hire new people, and become operationally more active. And so I wouldn't say it's easy. It's definitely something, like I say, I focus on the financing first. Do they have adequate investment at hand, or can they attain adequate investment? And in the Silicon Valley lingo, when you talk about investment or even finance, it's a lot about venture capital. Are they able to raise the adequate venture capital, or do they have enough venture capital in order to make that expansion possible? So it's actually really fun helping companies figure out the timeline that will enable them to then make the decision is this something that's going to be easy or is this something that's going to be tough? In terms of regulations in Germany and in Europe, it's a different landscape on many fronts. If we're talking about technology, the way it's used, the way that, you look at the Facebook or Cambridge Analytica scandal, you look at the way that Apple has been, sued by the EU for basing some of its operations in one place, but hiring people in another place that were cheaper and then trying to skirt around taxation in some ways. So a lot of big tech companies in America have problems with regulators in Europe. And so to say that it's easy, a lot of even smaller companies then have the fear that at some point they're going to be regulated against. But this is still too big of a market chance for them not to approach, given that Europe is in many ways a mirror market to North America. Okay. So, no, it's not easy. That's the answer. It's not like a yes and no. No, it's not easy. It's not easy because of an actual expansion, the amount of investment in time, as I said, but then also in terms of regulatory. And then you have to care about people, finding the right people, and then the terms under which you hire the people, because you want to protect yourself as a company from future lawsuits and stuff like that, or legal changes to employment. So it's very complex, and it's something that should be approached with caution and with forethought. Yeah.
So you previously you did your undergrad in economics from Princeton University.
Well, actually, I studied more European law, also looking at the European Union, and so it did focus to some extent on economics, but the focus was mainly on like law and political the part that was economics was political economy. So helping look at how the EU came into existence in the Eurozone, and then a lot of political and legal institutions that emerged from the growth of the European Union in the 20th century. So that was my main focus at Princeton. Yeah.
Did your master's from the TU Munich?
Yeah.
That's about the time when we got to know each other?
Exactly, yeah.
So your focus at the TU was environmental economics?
Yeah, environmental and energy economics.
So can you tell us a little bit about the transition from how you got from there to what you're doing now?
Yeah, so it was mostly an interest right after undergraduate to working in energy and climate policy. And that's how I ended up coming to Germany. And so I decided I wanted to live in Europe, and I was going to live in German-speaking Europe because I felt that being the center of Europe and a lot going on as the largest market in Europe, it would offer a lot of opportunity. And so once I arrived here, I decided to then pursue my master's degree at the Technical University, because I knew that I would want to go back to the US and still have a connection to Germany in some way. And when I say Germany, I don't necessarily mean Germany, I mean German-speaking Europe, because I actually enjoy spending time in also Austria and Switzerland. Liechtenstein is not so big on my list. I've never actually been there, although I've been through it. And most importantly, I like the German-speaking region because of the Alps and a lot of the natural parts so that's just a slight diversion from our topic of how I got from one thing to another. So working in energy and climate policy also focused on transport, urban transport of cities, how US regions and cities could use what's happening in Germany to become more sustainable and more resilient as it regards energy efficiency, energy generation that's renewable, and also climate change resilient. So that motivated me to, do a master's degree in Germany as one of the pioneer countries as it regards renewable energies, and also energy efficiency, and also smart urban planning, densely populated cities with great public transport that lower, of course, people's carbon footprints. Very, very strong recycling culture. Those sorts of things motivated me to wanting to study it in Germany. Which has been one of the pioneering countries on a lot of those fronts. And as a matter of fact, I ended up studying at the TU Munich, as you mentioned, and their faculty of resource management, which has come forestry and resource management, which was one of the first sustainability, studying fields and one of the first faculties to focus on that. Because sustainability is it can be really misused in a lot of ways to mean greenwashing. It was born out of forestry, right? Because forestry was one of the first forms of, regenerating things and focusing on nature and in the environment. But my focus specifically has been on the environmental side, renewable energy technologies, and then on the energy side, focusing on the economics of depletable and non-depletable resources, but mostly focused on depletable resources, because that allows you to make the argument as to why renewable resources are so important. And so as an energy economist, I really was interested still in how cities can benefit from renewable energy development and the messaging around depletable energy resources and the actual economics of it. Because it does impact everything from, agriculture to fisheries and all these sorts of very, very relevant topics. But the most important one to me was energy generation. And that's why I then transitioned into electromobility after, mobility first and then electromobility after. And now a part of my mandate is still then focusing on energy because that's the ministry for which I work.
Sounds very cool. James, I will ask you now a little bit about the organization and the personal part of your life because you are engaged in so many different things. You are a really high achieving person. Like I said at the very beginning, you're working really hard, but also really achieving really great things. And how do you manage to do all that and still travel so much and still enjoying life?
It's very difficult, I would say. I think you have to force yourself to build in time buffers to have to yourself. I mean, we've experienced that today, just trying to schedule and fit things in. Coming from so far, being on the go the last, 14 days now has really been, a lot on me, but I've got still, 13 more to go. So just traveling nonstop when it's necessary for work or for private can really wear down on you. But that's the traveling part. More, to your point about how balancing it in your private life, I think really making sure that you take time to get good rest, to work out, to ensure that you have strong relationships around you, personal relationships, that you're eating healthy, and that also, hydration is very important. I mean, just general health, being careful with what you put in your body is very important, and not doing things that sort of endanger your health. A lot of people have a lot of vices, whether that's eating sweets or, not working out or smoking cigarettes or whoever, does those sorts of things. I always put health first because without health, there is no me. And so without me, any of the things that rely on me, whether it's work, whether it's my family, they can't go forward. They're stalled if I am not healthy. So I always like to try to stop the world to just focus on me sometimes and focus on recollecting. I don't think I've been brought to the point where I wear a Fitbit and count how many steps a day. But I keep in mind that I could always be more active, that I could always use the steps instead of an elevator, that I can always drink more water, that I can always go work out those 20 minutes, even if you need to fit it in. Not just for physical appearances, but for heart health and just general health, because health is the most important thing.
Yeah, that's right.
In my view. Family, of course, as well, but those are relationships. And those are the two areas I think that besides work will give you sustenance to keep being high achieving. You can't be high achieving without good health.
That's right.
Or health that is maintained in some way. And then also positive relationships that help uplift you, so that don't necessarily bring you down. Yeah.
Awesome. I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
In everyday life, at work, or in relationship situations, when you plan your day, how do you manage to keep your priorities? Like, is there any tools or tactics that you use?
God, I use a lot of to-do lists. I'm very old-fashioned. I mean, I either write to-do lists down or use the notes function on my iPhone. And that's really it. I mean, for me, because there's so much to be done, I was just speaking with a former colleague yesterday, and I said, I'm in constant execution mode, and that is something that I really don't always like. But upon reflection today, I said, well, if I weren't, nothing would be getting done, because the headquarters of where I work is 9 hours ahead of where I sit. So when I'm going to bed at 11, it's already in the morning and the emails are starting to come in. And I'm not saying a million emails, but on a day, maybe you'll get 7 to 10. And those things have to be done probably as soon as possible. Maybe even before I go to bed, or sometime if I wake up in the middle of the night, or at the morning when I wake up in the morning. Because if I've pushed back my whole day if I wait to do them if I'm in the office. Because I'm in California. I have my own appointments. Sometimes we have our own business trips, of course, at least once or twice a month. And then we have our own events as well. And also, like I said, appointments, because you have meetings and then your actual work. And then all the operational and administrative stuff that has to be taken care of.
It sounds like a lot.
It's quite a lot to do. So any other work that is, depending on or connected to the headquarters, which is 9 hours ahead, I automatically just execute it because it has to be done so it's out of the way for my actual work, which I still then have to report on to them anyway. But that's just one point. I think execution mode is the toughest mode to stay in, not the toughest in terms of getting stuff done, but because you know you're not working at your highest level of consciousness. I think you can elevate and then work into actual getting stuff done, which is what I call actual working. So there's execution, actual working, which is, doing the presentations or doing the models, making Excels, reading and learning. And that folds into the next one, which is where you just actually sit and learn, because working is not learning. Working, you're practicing what you've learned. And then there's other things where you can just sit and think. So I like to have all those 4 sort of modes of working in my head, remembering that I need to make time for them is what I mean by that. By in my head, I mean that I need a constant ping to remember I should just be sitting and thinking and conceptualizing and strategizing. That's what I call the last one. So executing, actually working, learning, and then strategizing, because those are all things that are different. And I spoke with my former colleague about that yesterday. I said, I had some time to reflect, and I think I'm spending so much time executing, but if I didn't spend time executing, work wouldn't get done. And then there's actual working, which you do less and less of that, the higher and higher up you go, because you're delegating quite a lot. You have to have trust in the people that work for you for that. And then there's learning, which you should be making more time for, and that's a difficult thing. And then strategizing, which is also difficult to make time for, because you don't trust your ability to strategize effectively if you haven't been spending enough time in the trenches doing the actual work, doing the actual learning. And so it's hard to sort of, with executing maybe, because executing has to be done. Those are the most obvious, that's the first sign that you're not being effective if you haven't executed enough at a certain time. But that's just my thought about how I structure and think about things.
If you would give some tips or some, some ideas to youngsters who want to work in similar fields such as you, also like the kind of educational background that you've had with Ivy League and Princeton and all that, like the tough league, would you have some advice for young people watching?
I think the most important thing is to realize that, and it takes a lot to accept this, at some point in your life you will face rejection, and I know that's very cynical or a very negative place to start, but it's brace yourself for rejection, but always prepare yourself for success. I think that's something that is very important, because if you're able to brace yourself for failure, anything that stems from your success will be a value add. It will be something additional. So I think youngsters need to know, first and foremost, to work hard for what they want, but focus on determining what it is that they want as they work hard towards it. And there will be times where you will be let down, but to focus on those times where you're uplifted, when you get the great grade, or when you're allowed to, perform an exam, or when you do great on an exam, or in terms of getting into, high achieving educational institutions and succeeding there. That's something I think I could have always done better, but focusing on what your end goal is and not prioritizing things that won't matter later. I think that's something a lot of students don't yet do, because they're in the here and now. So focusing on the long term, what it is you want to get out of your education. You don't just go to a university to learn and not be able to apply it in the real world. So focusing on what it is you want to get out of your education and knowing ahead of time. In terms of staying motivated, I would say don't let peer pressure, don't let your other classmates, or even if you do an internship, your colleagues there, don't let other people determine what it is that you want to do. Everyone else was going into consulting and finance, and I decided to go a completely different route because I knew that wasn't something that was in sync with who I was as a person. That's right. And then I had another chance to go this route after TU Munich, some years later, and I was like, no, yet again, this is not the right route for me. That's right. I am not meant to do something that's going to be, in my view, a bit more meaningful. And now working at the crossroads of the public sector and tech, which is helping tech companies to come abroad to Europe. And the crux of my job is thereby to add new jobs to this economy. That's what I'm judged on. How many new jobs have I brought? How many interesting companies that are hiring people, bringing talent? Why is that relevant? Because you're bringing new ideas that kind of push the needle forward on technology. If you're bringing new competitive companies into the landscape, some people might say, well, then that makes it a harder landscape for companies that are already there. And I argue differently, because you can only achieve a higher level of, technological, advancement if other people are competing. If you have more players that are competing. I mean, this is economics 101, but I think it's really true. You know, companies should always want more competition because without competition, they'll stagnate more than anything.
So James, it was great to have you here. I hope you have a great time in Munich and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.